We're going to have a panel discussion on strengthening policy through research and innovation. So we are honored to have three distinguished speakers for our panel discussion today. The first one I will introduce because has just joined us for this discussion. Is David Mair, Head of Unit at the Joint Research Centre for the European Commission. David has been with the European Commission since 1995 and currently leads the JRC's work on democracy. Welcome. On democracy, science for policy and knowledge sharing. With a background in consumer policy and regulatory enforcement, he brings extensive experience in evidence-informed policy making. David holds a degree in history from Cambridge University. So, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Our second panelist is Christine Tresignie, Managing Director of Ipsos European Public Affairs. Thank you for joining. And of course, Tanja Kimova, Head of Evidence for Continental Europe at Verian Group. Following their keynote presentations, our speakers will engage in a dynamic discussion on the evolving role of research in evidence-based policy making. The panel will be ably moderated by Kim Smouter-Oomans, Chair of SOMAR's Legal Affairs Committee. Kim also led SOMAR's efforts in championing market opinion and social research as Head of Public Affairs and Professional Standards and has extensive experience in social policy, education and employment. Kim holds a master's degree in European Public Affairs and a bachelor's degree in European Studies.
So good afternoon, everyone. We're going to try to also make this interactive, so I'm going to ask the speakers to be short in their responses so that we can actually include and involve you as well. So as you've heard, my name is Kim Smouter. I'm the chair of the SMR Legal Affairs Committee, and I'm also known in Brussels under the title of the European Network Against Racism's Executive Director. So I'm also here representing and advocating on behalf of racialized minorities, so we discussed that as well in the presentations. The importance of involving the voices which are often less heard about in policy making. Before we begin the panel, I wanted to give perhaps David an opportunity to introduce himself and also to introduce the Joint Research Centre. As we've heard, research plays a critical part in contributing to evidence-based decision making, but it's under threat. So it'd be really interesting to hear from you what is the Joint Research Centre's role in that, and also perhaps kind of what is the new von der Leyen Commission, what is its attitude towards evidence-based decision-making?
Thanks very much, thanks for this opportunity. So the Joint Research Centre is the biggest department of the European Commission. It's not a policy department. Our job is to bring scientific evidence into policy. We have laboratories measuring things, shaking things, but also we include social science in that. Part of my job is campaigning in the policy sphere to embed a culture, processes and the practice of using scientific evidence throughout the policy process, not only in the Commission, but also in the Member States. So we've published a number of policy documents, Council conclusions, all these sorts of things on the importance of scientific evidence in forming public policy. We also have an interest in, of course, the things that you're doing around opinion polling and related topics. The JRC as a whole does have a lot of science. Of course, social scientists use surveys a lot. We have a behavioural insights team doing a lot of behavioural experiments. Within my team, we lead the Commission's Centre on Participatory and Deliberative Democracy, which is another form of understanding what citizens want. And we're increasingly involved in thinking about how all this fits together with democracy. So very happy that I heard you are conscious that all your work is at the centre of the epistemic crisis we're living through. It's you need to think as much about trust and process legitimacy as outcome legitimacy and quality. That's going to be incredibly important. Good to hear that you're really thinking hard about the very deep challenges to surveying and polling. People say to me, they're finished, they're gone. I don't know if that's true, but for all the reasons you say, biases, survey bias, these sorts of things. Beginning to look into synthetic populations. Is that a future? What is the Commission doing? Well, I think the most tangible thing you can say in this area is that there is a renewed commitment to hearing from citizens. And that is expressed by the fact that in every single mission letter, the President says every Commissioner must play their part in creating a true and lasting legacy of participative democracy. And I quote from the letter. And that's already being followed through. We work very closely with our good friends and colleagues in DG Com. They're continuing to do citizens panels. I think it's not trivial that they've announced one in the last few days on the multi-annual financial framework, which is a big issue. So the Commission is now willing to open up the reflection process on such a big topic to the voices of citizens. So that I think is a very encouraging sign, and I think there will be more in that direction.
I hope a second microphone is coming soon. I think it's work in progress. I wanted to ask you, Christine, so we've heard that it's becoming more and more important to hear from people's voices. But what we're also seeing, we saw that in the European elections and those types of things, we are seeing an increasingly polarized society. So in fact, actually, if we look at the electorate, we're moving less in the center, we're moving more and more towards the far left, towards the far right. How do we use research in that case if we have these kinds of very polar opposites coming out as the recommendation for policymakers? And what role would you see for research to help inform decision makers who potentially, as I think David kind of highlights, a lot of them are saying, actually, I don't need to actually say the truth because actually that's how I win elections anyway.
I think you're pinpointing something that is happening right now, and what is difficult as researchers. I think one of the things I said is we provide facts, and when David just mentioned is survey research dead? I've been hearing that all my career, that survey research is dead. I think it's not about survey research as such. It is more about knowing how to sample, knowing what we are doing. It's about, we are scientists. We're not just researchers, we're also scientists. You heard Tanja speak about everything that we do. It's about knowing what we do. And so we can present the facts with confidence, and that's our job. How policy responds to that and uses that, that's beyond our job. I think we can advise and we can have an opinion, but I don't feel comfortable about saying how they should use it. I think we should together find out what you need to make informed decision making, to make sure that you have that at hand. But in the end, it's the policy makers and also the people that have chosen the people to represent them that will make those decisions. So that would be my answer to that. But survey research is not that yet.
Tanja, I wanted to bring you into the conversation. So we saw through the slides that there's a vast array of methodologies possible. There's a vast array of tools and techniques that are developing, that are available, that weren't before. Basically, we have actually a more powerful toolbox than ever when it comes to evidence-based decision making. But do you feel that the institutions, the ones who are commissioning the research, are they enough aware of all the possibilities, and are they innovative enough in terms of what they're actually contracting for research?
Okay, tricky one. Well, I can also maybe talk about what I think is best practice. So I think whenever a complicated brief comes up, whenever the client decides to do market analysis is the right thing to do, because we could have been doing some classical way of surveying. And by classical, I don't only mean face-to-face. It could be something that has been ingrained in the practices. And then, they now are thinking, okay, so I want to make sure I'm sort of in line with the times. I am taking up innovation. I'm going to go back and refer to the industry experts. So they invite us for our panels. They invite us to submit notes. So there's this pre-tender cycle, which is done in full transparency. Both our teams are invited, and I think it's quite open. I think that's a really useful way of gathering what is the latest, because it's actually hard to keep up. Even if you read a paper a week, there's still quite a big proliferation of what is the right thing to do and what is the best thing to do. And so I think whenever a brief comes up, you sort of research that brief and you find out what's the best for that case, but it's always going to be tailored. So I suppose this is one thing I really strongly recommend. Some institutions actually go to the length of having meetings to discuss, then they do the market analysis. So sometimes they do an even deeper dive, if that makes sense. So I think this makes a lot of sense. And then practices around piloting and testing something before. I think I sort of mentioned this in terms of transitioning time series, because now I'm thinking, there's the Eurobarometer contract, which is face-to-face, and this is a time series existing for more than 40 years. So, if there is any view of moving that safely onto the next type of data collection strategy, then I think it's worth piloting it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Just a short answer also to that. I think the reputation of the EU institutions sometimes on research, they're being seen as very traditional and very old school, and I think that's probably the reputation. I feel differently, because if you go and look what the GRC is publishing and the people they have on board, I wish I had a few of them in my team, because they are very forward thinking, and it's very so. There's two ways. Okay, we still have those face-to-face because we have a long tradition, because we want to have historical data. There's many reasons to do it, but that's not only that. They are doing a lot of innovation, so I'm speaking for you now. But
Well, I'm feeling very guilty because I think two of the people in my team are from your former employees that I've managed. So thank you for training them so well. There's something I think very important at the heart of what you're saying. So what worries me at the moment, I don't know if this is true, but it's my feeling, is that social media is giving politicians a false negative of the state of the political debate, because so many people are turned off from politics, they're not voting, and they're certainly turned off from social media, and social media monetizes extremist opinions. So I've had a lot of conversations around science policy in many member states lately, and they say the politicians are trapped, they don't know which way to go, the country can't move on. If they go this way, there's that bunch of people who are unhappy. And what has been lost sight of is, I don't know if this is the right phrase, but the silent majority, the people who are perhaps more reasonable in the political space, but they're so totally turned off, we never hear from them and what they want and what they care about. So it's ever more important that we have truly randomized samples, whether it's opinion polls or whether it's citizens' assemblies or whatever else it is, these listening exercises that capture the voices that social media, elections, other things are not capturing. So, because it may be the centre ground is a bit more reasonable, a bit more moderate, and therefore that'll give the politicians a little bit more confidence that actually there is more political space to do things than they think they are. And the real battleground for this, which I think is incredibly important where you have a role to play, is what are the prevailing norms in society? So there's a lot of debate about misinformation and disinformation, about factual disagreement, but I think the really important part of misinformation is what are the prevailing norms? And there is this unbelievably important concept in social psychology which has a terrible name, it needs to be renamed. I've got a bottle of champagne if you can come up with a really good name. The name of this phenomenon is pluralistic ignorance, which basically everyone thinks that everyone else thinks something. So what everyone thinks is the prevailing norm or opinion is out of line with what actually it is. So the great debates about what happened in Ireland around same-sex marriage or abortion was, did the process actually change the views, or had people long since already changed their minds, but they thought, oh, everyone else is still against abortion or same-sex marriage. And all that happened is there was a catch-up reconciliation process where the pluralistic ignorance is closed, and therefore what was the prevailing norm aligned with what it really was. And what you can see is there are an awful number of bad actors who are trying to create pluralistic ignorance and say, well, in fact, everyone thinks that no one wants a Muslim for a neighbour or a black person for a neighbour or something, and that is what everyone thinks. And we know from social psychology that if you label something as everyone thinks that will have an effect on people's behaviours. So that is where your work is so important to understand where actually is the centre ground, where is the common ground from people we're not hearing from, and to pay close attention to are various claims made by politicians about what everyone thinks or everyone wants. Are they true? Or maybe that's, that they're trying to create a norm. This is what politics is. It's the battle of societal norms. And you doing polling on this and saying, well, in fact, no, everyone does want more migrants or fewer migrants or whatever else it may be. That is so important for the quality of our democracy.
Thank you, David, for that point. Time is ticking, and I really did actually want to include people from the audience in the conversation a little bit. If I can ask the SMR colleagues perhaps to take this mic away from me and then to offer to those who wish to have questions. I already saw that the lady in front has a question she wanted to raise to the panel. And if anybody else has, please raise your hands. We're not going to have that many opportunities for questions. I would say we'll take 2 or 3, and then we'll conclude the panel so that we're still able to get a really important coffee break. Yes, so if you can introduce yourself, where you're from.
Yes, don't be surprised. I'm not business, I'm not money, I'm not finance. I am social communication. I have the age of the United Nations, so I can be your mother. I had 2 questions. I think about gender equality, I'm very proud of those 2 ladies. I'm proud of the men too, but let me say those 2 ladies. My question was, first, thank you for inviting me. I came all over from Paris, and having 80 years old, I walked from the station up to here. So I'm very happy to be here to tell you, think of the people all like me. Digital, AI in Paris, that was the summit. Everybody. When I was in Berkeley, I graduated from Berkeley, and I am Pan-African parliamentarian, so I know the parliament, I know all that. But when I was in Berkeley in the 70s, nothing of all that, nothing. Now, AI, everything is digital. Even if you order a ticket or you buy something, you need digital. Think of those people, do something, you researchers, and involve more the NGOs and the active citizens in the field. They know the needs of the older, the younger, they know the needs. I was very happy. I said, what am I doing here? I don't have money, I'm not social media, but I'm very happy I came because I learned a lot. I have a big NGO in Paris, accredited by the United Nations. I'm going to organize a panel to tell them about you and about many things I didn't understand, sorry. But many things I understood. But just to tell you, thank you for sharing, but please involve more civil society organization to bring your word and your message and your research to the field. Thank you.
Thank you. The benefit of wearing a bright colour.
Yes.
My name's Lucy Farrell. I work for Think's Insight and Strategy, which is a research and engagement practice. I actually work in participatory and deliberative engagement. And I'm always interested in how, particularly I guess for you as practitioners, you think about the difference between public opinion and citizen and citizen perspectives. I often talk in my work about the difference between public opinion and public judgment, and that what we try to get to through participatory and deliberative methods is a perspective that someone might take through a process of consideration. So I'm just interested in how you see the sort of the respective roles of public opinion research versus those types of processes, and how that might help to square some of the challenges that you've described around trust, around polarisation, around the particular type of ignorance you talked about.
Thank you very much. My name is Ophelia Mnes. I also travelled all the way from Paris this morning. I have a practice in diversity, equity and inclusion, and I also work on policymaking and advocacy. And we mentioned AI. It's a very trendy topic. I think I even heard at some point that AI has no bias, or that we should use AI that is not biased. And AI is very much biased, and I was wondering, as researchers and scientists, as you mentioned, what is done to challenge those biases? Is there anything done to hire scientists that have different perspectives to program AI differently? Because that's a topic that is not enough discussed, and especially when it comes to representation of citizens in the EU that are very often taken out of those polls. That I'm a big consumer of the polls from the EU myself, but always wondering, is it everyone, or is it always the same kind of people who would be happy to answer polls about the EU and the perception? Thank you very much.
So we have 3 questions. We're going to close now so that we are able to answer them before giving time for your coffee. So there's 3 questions. How do we ensure that the digitally excluded are not left behind? How do we ensure, what is the difference between public opinion and engagement? I think you understood the question. And then the question around bias, and how do you account for bias? How do you ensure that AI does not replicate the biases that are already present?
Well, I can only really vaguely, competently answer this question because of the deliberative team that I have. The way I see it is, I think the first thing is deliberative experiments are much better at capturing lived experience than polling, and lived experience is problematic, but it's incredibly important for the democratic process. I think the other big thing is that you can deal with trade-offs, and all the problems are around trade-offs, and it's quite hard through surveys. It's not possible, but it's harder to do also complex trade-offs, and there's one policy issue we're working on where there are sort of 52 different trade-offs you have to make. So can you do that through a survey? I think actually talking through the trade-offs is very, very powerful, so that's why it's so precious. And then the beauty of the deliberative exercise is it's much more open question. So surveys start with the question, and deliberations don't necessarily have to start with a question, or part of the deliberation is opening up to other questions, which is very, very powerful.
Maybe I'll take the one on biases. We did not say there is no bias, the contradiction. I think as research and as an agency, we use it a lot, and everything that we currently do with AI is based on what we call truth, beauty, and justice. So everything goes through that evaluation framework. Truth meaning it's being accurate. Beauty meaning it's transparent. We know how it came to that answer. And justice means it is inclusive. It is adhering to ethical norms. So I think that's very important. It's something that we are exploring. And I said it in my presentation. Anything what has to do with AI, we need to be fast in testing, and we need to be extremely careful in rolling it out. We need to be confident that it doesn't have those biases. And you know, AI at this moment, it is predictive. If you ask it for an answer twice, it's going to give you a different answer. This is not what research stands for. We are robust, and that's what it needs to deliver. So I think, yes, let's test it. And I love the synthetic population. We developed something, it's PersonaBot for testing of communication messages. It's a new world. I'm excited. But it's a different thing as saying that this is now the world, or how we're going to do things. So yes, biases is very important, and we take it very seriously.
I can add to that. So I think in terms of biases, and then I wanted to add something on the deliberation bit. So I think the other thing that really helps to mitigate for this issue of bias is using the LLM's algorithms, but in a closed environment, and really making sure that they don't, because what's a known fact is that AI hallucinates, and when it captures, so if you use ChatGPT or any of the sort of open source LLMs, they'll take data from anywhere, and a lot of that will be fed through bots or politically motivated speeches or whatever. They'll be fed disproportionately by specific types of audience that are on the extremes of society. So what we're making sure it does is that it works in a closed loop environment, in Azure, for example, networks, and then it only predicts or synthesizes the data that it's been given, and it doesn't sort of go outside. And then our research, and it's only meant to really help the researchers go quicker and interrogate the data. They always have to go back and check and verify. So it's really meant to enhance the powers of synthesizing rather than driving the insights themselves. I sort of wanted to add something on the deliberation bit, and very much building on what you just said. So there are indeed methodologies where it makes sense to have a kind of a semi-structured, semi-open conversation where the qualitative responses really drive the content, but actually the people are exposed to feedback loops, because on some complex topics they won't be able to make up their mind quickly or the first time you show them something. So we did this exercise for the European Central Bank for the digital euro, where they actually had to understand what the digital euro was and making decisions, and then I suppose feeding back about what they thought the feature should be wasn't something they were going to come up in the first hour. So we sort of exposed them to a learning curve. It was an open community, and it was a community of, let's say, 100 people. So it enabled us to identify some patterns, but also have that qualitative component to actually make the readers, the insights much richer.
There was a third question around how do we ensure the digitally excluded are not researched?
I think I just wanna add to that as research agencies and an industry, yes, it's easier to do the general population, and there's a lot of studies on there, but there's a lot of studies also on vulnerable groups, and that's as important. And if we go back to the digital euro, we just did a lot of studies with vulnerable groups on this, because it's a different understanding, it's a different communication, and so we have to include that. So I think it doesn't make our life easier, because it's not an easy topic often to research and to find the groups and to make sure that we have the correct voice of those groups, but it makes our jobs exciting, and it's something we don't forget. And we might be a bit younger, but I always think of my parents. Could they do that? Would they understand this? And this makes you reflect. And we work with experts, and I can say that we have to challenge the EU institutions quite a bit on their questionnaires and on their concepts and what they are thinking of, because they are in it so much that we're saying, respondent, people don't understand this, we need to have other messages. And I think we need to sometimes build other questionnaires depending on the target group. So we are not forgetting about you.
So building on that, I suppose in what I talked about in terms of hyper mixed mode and web first methodologies, I think the term web first could be, I suppose, misleading to say that that's the only way that we survey people. So the point is that the first mode will cover 80-90% of the population, but then we follow up with offline modes, and that's telephone, paper, face-to-face. So we make sure that the underrepresented populations are indeed present. There was actually a paper in one of the past conferences that really showed that even if you underrepresent 3% of the population, if that's a very different population, and this is how societies are actually making it, the more that population is different, the less robust and representative the findings are. So actually the biggest effort we need to input is making sure that we really find a way to communicate with that niche population. The second thing is, for example, we did some work for the Fundamental Rights Agency, the Roma study. To survey the Roma, for example, we have to engage the local NGOs so that we have because they won't sort of buy the sell that this is sponsored by some government or European institution. They just want to know that they're talking to their local NGO who's protecting their local interests, etc. So we've had to actually engage the civil society to make interviewing possible at all. So this is something that's very active in our to-do list.
Thank you. I'm going to draw this panel almost to a close, but I want to give you a final chance to say a few words. And I wanted to kind of ask you a question. I like actionable advice or things that we can bring to the European Commission as a good public affairs professional. So one or two things that you would want to say, for David, and it's a new European Commission. So lots of things are moving, lots of things are being reviewed and those types of things. What would you say the European policy framework, and here we're all the European Brussels bubble, what are the things that we should be thinking about to safeguard evidence-based decision-making moving forward?
well, I have a favorite word, and that's innovation. And innovation in the sense of fit for purpose and future-proofing, and really to continue the conversation going.
And I would pick collaboration. I think research agencies might have seen too long as data collection agencies, and we have so much expertise on board. I think we can be earlier at your table than that we are sometimes right now, and it's not only the academia maybe, but also to include some of our research agencies in the discussions up front would be also very helpful. I know we have sometimes the opportunities, but probably not always, so the collaboration would be my word to pick.
What advice do you have for yourself?
Just a reflection. So a couple of years ago I started the work to think about how can we increase the demand and use of scientific evidence in government inside the Commission and elsewhere. And this seemed like a kind of self-serving task for the JRC because we're the science organisation. And it was about 3 years ago that I realised that it is impossible to separate the question of how to bring science into government from democracy. So there aren't two crises. There isn't an epistemic crisis and a crisis of trust in democracy. It's the same crisis. And this conversation makes that very clear because we're talking about how do you, from a research point of view, how do you reach difficult to reach populations? But that's also the democracy crisis, how to reach the people who are turned off from voting. So whether it's sampling for research or getting people to vote and all the rest of it, it's the same thing. So do not underestimate that you are there's a crisis of democracy, there's a battle for democracy, and you're on the battlefield on that one. You're not separate from it.
Thank you all. I think we've spoken so much about how, business as usual in this day and age when even the concept of evidence-based decision making is under attack. And I think you've made such a powerful and potent case as to why insights is going to be such a critical element in the toolbox of trying to restore trust in democracy and trying to recreate, a consensus around where society should go and that society should involve each and every one of us. So a huge thanks for all of you for being here on this panel. I just wanted to highlight that, as SMR has said, they're currently revising the ICC SMR code. It really is the central document which underpins how ethical research is being conducted by the companies which have been represented on this panel today. And I just invite you to take a look at it when it gets adopted in June, because a lot of the things that we discussed today, the use of AI, the use of new technologies and those types of things, will be very much part and parcel of that discussion. So kudos to SMR for leading that conversation. And at this stage, all I can do is invite you for a coffee break. I'm just looking at the organizers. So then I give the floor back to Xavier. But thank you, all three of you, for such insightful contributions.